Hello, I'm Louise Kames, among the first members of the city's Arts and Cultural Affairs Advisory Commission and a member of the Commission's Art on the River Committee. Early in September 2006, a group of people gathered in the Port of Dubuque to inaugurate a new initiative to celebrate the arts, the installation of several sculptures to add visual splendor to our lovely riverfront. And so Art on the River was born. I was proud to be a part of that event, and I'm proud to be part of a city that values such expression. At its core, Art on the River is a temporary exhibition. Selected sculptures adorn the riverfront for a year and then make way for a new set. In the spring, artists from all over the country submit their work for consideration. 3 expert jurors select 10 finalists from a highly competitive field of regional and national artists. The sculptures are installed in June. In the first decade of Art on the River, we've had 96 different sculptures on display. This program looks back at the first 10 years. We'll see all 96 sculptures and hear from many of the artists. The variety of this artwork speaks to the variety of the human experience and to the power of art to provoke, inspire, and challenge. I hope you enjoy Art on the River, 10 years, A to Z.
It's about things going on in your head when there's too much to do, basically. I'm involved with a jam band. We get together once in a while and jam to various phrases or lyrics or chord progressions. And we're working on a song called 745 and Don't Be Late. I thought it'd be interesting to do a piece, a sculpture at the same time as I'm working on that, and so that's kind of the genesis of this particular sculpture.
This piece in particular, every component of the piece is literally borrowed from farm site salvage, so tin roofing and window blocks from barns and obviously the tractor seat from machinery and the pulleys from a barn, all kind of speak to that the agrarian sort of aesthetic of things that I find. And I guess when I travel, you know, having lived in Minnesota and taught in Ohio for so long, I think traveling to the Midwest, I see these farms dotted in the rural landscape as little cathedrals. And so I think compositionally the piece kind of borrows from sacred architecture and agrarian architecture, and those two references are sort of weaved together into a compositional whole. And then I think there's just sort of a funness about it where the viewer can sit in the tractor seat and participate with it and be a part of the piece.
I did a piece called Always the Horrors of War. I was upset by all the beheadings that have been going on in the Middle East. They seem to always be innocent people and done very, very cruelly. So that's been on my mind. And I always do horses anyway. So I thought instead of doing people's heads, I would do horse heads, because they are always innocent. You know, they're simply doing what their masters require of them. So they represent all the innocent people who have suffered at the hands of the militants.
I'm here with Anchor Lily 2, which is a monumental scale version of a piece I first did at UW-Madison. It's just sort of speaking about form and function in plant anatomy and design. I do a lot of work that is sort of based on kind of biomimetic science, just sort of looking at architectural forms in organic forms and tying them together through fabricated metal. The point with Anchor Lily specifically is it was part of a series on form and function in plant architecture. You know, water lilies' roots aren't actually needed to bring water to the plant because it lives in water. They're just sort of there to keep it from floating off.
It's sort of like a comet just a millisecond before earthly impact. These forms here are mimicking branches, so they're like tree-like forms, and so it has a botanical aspect to it as well. There's a wildflower called prairie smoke, which has tendrils that fly up in the air like that. So it has a botanical reference and it has a reference to stars.
I started off thinking about aquatic life and things on the river, and I started off with a boat sort of a shape. So you can see on the top it's an upside down boat to start with, and I started thinking about the animals in and around the water. And so I came up with a bird and a fish. They associate a lot with the water. So I essentially just took a shape of a fish, parts and pieces of it, and parts and pieces of a bird, like the wing, the beak. The fish would be the fins, scales, kind of merged them together, and I came up with At the Water's Edge.
The title of the piece is called Balance. I've done a series of pieces that kind of have to do with life, getting through life, problems, tools to kind of do that. And in the series I have a compass, now a balance or a scale, and currently working on some other pieces that fall into a similar realm. So it's really just about finding your balance and how you do that.
I took the dragonfly, the image of it, and put a gas tank as the body of it, a gas tank off a motorcycle, and then I applied that to the bobber, which has weight. It looks like that there's the weight of the dragonfly is actually bending the bobber. And I kind of want to put them together and combine the two things that I enjoy.
The sculpture that's in the show this year is entitled Breakaway, and it looks kind of like a jungle cat is what I call it, very fondly. But when I was creating the piece, I was thinking about what it means to kind of forge your own way in this world, to go out in the world and to kind of break away from the pack a little bit. And this piece was made when I was kind of changing life directions a little bit and having to kind of go in my own path and figure out what life really looks like and how that's exciting, but it demands a lot of courage and bravery.
When you see my piece, I'm very interested in how it relates to the body, the plays. There's imagery with the anvil and the star, and I think I'm trying in a very broad and poetic way to say something about gravity, the weight of the anvil, and levity, or the celestial quality of the star, the struggle of what it means to be a human and to engage materials and plays. Those are the things that I'm interested in as a sculptor.
One of my, I guess, strong sculptural beliefs is that it doesn't necessarily have to have any particular meaning or imply any kind of direction to lead the viewers to think of any particular problem or issue in the world or anything like that, which a lot of art does. Mine is more about kind of the material and the process of working with it. My kind of goal is to make the stainless steel do what it doesn't want to do and make it create beautiful forms by doing that.
I designed the piece to look much like a coneflower, where you have the center portion up at the top with all its knobby kind of redness, and then the bottom portion is just silvery petals that are kind of in the wilt state. So at the portion where it's waning in the sunlight and it's kind of just closing up on itself. Its relationship to the universe is the most interesting portion of the piece. It detects muons, which are cosmic particles that kind of hit us every day and we don't even know about it. They're invisible. But essentially what happens is the muons hit the board that's inside, a little electronics board. It senses them, and then it emits a light at the top portion of the part, and it blinks every time it gets hit. In this way, I kind of hope that the viewer gets to see something that's earthly and cosmic all at once.
I grew up on the edge of Phoenix in the desert, or the desert was constantly being turned into the suburbs. And then moving to Detroit, seeing how it was kind of the opposite end of things, kind of things falling apart and deteriorating. And I noticed how the lines of volume and light and how things kind of sat there reminded me of some of the construction sites as a kid, and were really kind of an inspiration.
Well, the work I did is Dapple 1 and Dapple 2. They're two monumental aluminum horses. I've kind of tried to meld a naturalistic approach with a kind of abstract to get to something that I think is more like fantasy, kind of a memory.
I'm interested in developing a piece that has some recognition, that people will see it and they might recognize certain elements in it. They might think maybe it's a whistle or a teapot or something like that. But rather than one sort of recognition, I'm hoping it will lead to then other ideas, and so that the piece offers a range of associations and interpretations to the viewer related to domestic and industrial objects.
my sculpture is entitled Exhaling Dissolution, and it is an environmental piece about our growing population and how that's destroying a lot of our natural resources that we depend on. And all the wood used, I used cottonwood bark, and I use this material because I find it better for the environment than if I were to just use like steel, and it can naturally go back into the earth.
A lot of times, whatever's going on in my personal life will just kind of come out in a sculpture, and I happen to be on an airplane a lot lately, going to see a special person who lives halfway across the country, and so fly away home. I've always used the wings and the wheels and the kind of bits and pieces of detail that refer to transportation in my work anyway. So with this piece, it was just the thought behind all this traveling and flying away home that way, or flying away home back, which is home.
My piece is called Gansfeld 2. It's a series of works that I've been making that are sort of shelters you can go inside, that are made of drawings of perspective. A drawing that's normally two-dimensional, then made into 3 dimensions. So it goes from being something flat and something you could live in, and it's made out of old materials from houses. I go in and I rip out old lath and pull out all the nails and then repurpose it into a sculpture.
It was brought about by my grandfather from stories he used to tell me when we were fishing with him in Minnesota, me and my sister. And he would always tell us about catching certain size fish, and after the years he would always keep telling us the same stories. And every year the fish seemed to keep getting bigger and bigger. So that is why I built a 5-foot bass, kind of to represent him and what he's taught me.
My piece is titled The Human Shadow, and it's cast bronze of a newborn white-tailed deer casting the shadow of a wolf, and the head is visually distorted as if a slow-motion blur has permanently morphed the physicality. And that relates to the idea of Robert Bly. He's an author who wrote a book called A Little Book on the Human Shadow. And in the book he talks about, as children, we are these energetic balls, and over time parents and teachers start urging us to go into well-lit subjects like mathematics and music, and we start taming parts of ourselves that are seen as wild or aggressive.
A zoetrope is an old-fashioned form of animation. So it's like a cylinder object with still images on the inside and slits around the outside, and when you spin it, it creates an animation. And it's called I Fly, You Fly. And the meaning behind that is it looks at humans and all living beings, as in when we excel as an individual or as a living being and take care of ourselves and work positively to improve our lives, that it improves the lives of others before and after us as well.
I designed it as kind of a humorous play on the Stargate, or a time machine. So I guess humor, because I want humor to play into the piece, although it is somewhat serious and kind of science fiction-y, I think of it more like a Fifth Element kind of humor if we watch movies. There should be interplay. I think that art is for the masses, especially public art. There needs to be an interaction with the viewer and the material, otherwise it becomes another one of the public sculptures that become a nuisance after time.
This kind of points to the North Star, and it's kind of like a knot, K-N-O-T-T, but it's also like a big zero, which is space. So it's one of those things where it's meant to be somewhat fun, stacked blocks, tipped, something kind of in motion but not in motion, something very asymmetrical but yet symmetrical, and something that takes your eyes up and off the ground. So I just have fun stacking blocks.
I wanted to make a piece that represented Iowa in a way, but not in the stereotypical livestock and agriculture. And as I was doing some research, I found that the state capitol building in Des Moines is the only capitol building in the United States that has 5 domes on it. So I wanted to have that dome shape be part of the sculpture. Iowa is ranked #1 in percentage of power generated by wind, and second behind Texas in total power generated by wind. So I wanted like a wind turbine to be part of it as well. So that's what a wing was for, to represent wind turbine blades.
The piece is titled Journey, and the title actually came before the piece. It was kind of when I was trying to brainstorm basically what the piece was I wanted to create. I try to make my works that have a relationship to a word, basically. So journey then continues into this wave motion, which is like a perpetual motion, a journey in life, or even, I guess you could use the metaphor of a fork in the road.
Well, the sculpture appears to look like a pile of leaves if you come at it from a certain angle. And as you walk around it, you realize it's really a chair and an ottoman. And when I was, well, throughout my life, every time I've raked up a pile of leaves, I've always wanted to sit in that pile of leaves or jump in it. And so this kind of harkens back to that experience, and I want people to have that.
The sculpture that's in the Art on the River exhibition is entitled The Long Toss, which is a loose reference to yard games, kind of a pop art reference to that particular endeavor.
title of my sculpture in the exhibit is Lullaby. It's a fabricated bronze sculpture on a precast concrete base, and it was inspired by a good night's sleep on the lakeshore one evening last summer, and the soothing sound of the waves.
The piece that I have in the show this year is called Metal-Assisted Bramble Stack. It's a combination metal and driftwood piece. When I was a young boy, my mom and dad used to take me out on the river and let me loose on the islands to play around with the driftwood. And I've been doing that ever since, in between my metal sculpture. And so lately I've been kind of trying to combine the two. And so people ask me a lot of times what exactly is the meaning of this new work that I'm doing. And I have to admit that basically it's just a kid playing with sticks. I'm just kind of trying to reinvent that feeling that I used to have when I was a youngster.
The story just goes, this guy slowly turns into a bug. Like, his language gets all morphed up, he starts scaring his family, and just basically at the end of the story, he just totally metamorphosizes into a human bug, basically, and he kind of just basically just dies. So then this is just kind of an idea of if he actually made it outside of his house and then he just kind of maybe just went on the run, or just, you know, just kind of got out and lived, basically.
It's basically a takeoff of the lead mining, the native limestone, outcrop stone that the geology of the river, and also the interaction of the lead mining with the early French settlers. If you look at it from one angle, you see a little bit of an Indian head, and maybe when you look at it from another angle, you might see a little bit of an early American settler.
There was a big Indian civilization over by Utica, Illinois, and there's a legend of Starved Rock where the Illinois and the Potawatomi had a fight, and the Illinois went up to the top of the rock and were starved out. There are images in there that are like, when you turn your head or something and you say, oh, I thought I saw something.
This piece was originally built by me as a non-objective sculpture, but when I finally finished it, I looked at it and said, my goodness, this has some figurative qualities to it. I started thinking of a title for it, and I came up with Monolith Mantra, which is sort of a takeoff on the activity of a shaman. And what I saw was a figure which was pirouetting on its foot with his hand up in the air, doing a turn.
We were inspired by navigational instruments, mostly maps and compasses, depth charts, buoys, to kind of reference a journey. But the idea that those navigational instruments can be inaccessible or less effective when difficult things happen on that journey, like a death or an illness or a loss of a job, and yet we still have to continue on that journey. And each individual has to find their own way without the ordinary landmarks that would normally help them progress through life.
I don't want to really give away what it is. The goal is to have people think and respond and react to it rather than just, oh, that's what it is, and they nod their head knowingly and then it's over. But the engagement in asking the viewer to really resolve the issue of what it is themselves allows for multiple interpretations.
My work of art is Onioto Flow, Onioto for short. It's made out of metal rebar and collected willows, river willows that are floating all over the river this time of year from the high water. And it really doesn't have a meaning as much as just an essence of all the sticks and debris that flow down the river from the upper part of the Mississippi and collect along the wing dams and the rollers and things like that.
This piece is a little bit more about the cyclical nature of the processes of agriculture and man's interactions with the environment. And that's where the spiral shape kind of comes from. And each layer gets bigger or smaller, kind of depending on how that year was or how that cycle was. But again, dealing with issues of resource management and allocation and movement of, particularly in this case, water resources from one place to another.
The springboard for the piece was kind of based on a farmer who once told me working in the fields wasn't boring, it was good thinking time. And so I wanted to kind of respond to that through this salvage by creating this sort of this gathering space or thinking space or a place where you could literally sit down and sort of just engage in being lost in the moment. So, using, for example, the tractor seats and the tin roofing from barns and the tractor tire, and then casting the cast iron corn, just to kind of bring those disparate elements into one cohesive piece was really the sort of the attempt I was after with the work.
It's kind of juxtapositioning this figure that's very strong and has a imposing presence with the fact that he's got a cloth over his face and he's trying to clear it off, and he doesn't have a ton of control over his environment, given the fact that he seems like he would, based on scale, based on his musculature and everything else.
Growing up, I grew up in a city, and I also grew up on the West Coast and in a Midwest city, so moving back here and living in Iowa for the past, I guess, 7, 8, 9 years has really started to influence my sort of thinking in my artwork, and also just how the rural lifestyle, the prairie of Iowa, and how we use sort of ancient or old methods to solve modern problems and applying those to contemporary issues, and that sort of influenced the way I approach my work.
Prairie Walker is a series of sculptures I've been working on, which I'm very interested in engaging the public in viewing and experiencing art. So each person will perhaps bring a different sort of point of view to it, but the main thing is a reflection of movement. If you look at it closely, it's comprised straight lines and curved lines. Those curved lines kind of overlap one another, and you get this sense of movement across a space. And in my case, the reflection of moving and running across the prairie.
about 5 years ago, I had a one-man show at Batavia's Fermilab National Accelerator, and trying to get excited to do something new for that show. I was thinking about Fermilab and what they actually do there, and they're a particle collider is what they do. They collide particles, and the only way they can view what happens is through a negative on a photographic plate. And what it shows is these particles colliding and then disintegrating as they explode out from a certain point. And thinking that was sort of nice, but how could I represent that as a sculptor? I decided to take the particles going from one mass into another mass. The black wires represent those particles which are then disintegrating out of wherever the explosion was, and then going back into another mass. I have these solid areas which are painted in some very subtle colors, and then the black of the steel rod represents the particles and their disintegration and moving into another mass.
Then the Red Road Home piece is, again, an all sculpture piece, an all metal piece made out of Core-10 steel, and it represents the phases of the moon that I see out in the river, specifically the new phases of the spring moon, which I enjoy very much.
I designed a piece that used my signature style of polished geometric shapes interacting with these spiral, curving, organic forms. And so what I did is I designed a piece to represent the riverboat traffic and the riverboat history.
I usually work mostly in metal, but for the styrofoam pieces, I took a little change in direction. Out in the river, because of the floods and the weather, they have taken blocks of styrofoam out from underneath docks and created just these sculptures that are floating everywhere out in the islands. And I keep looking at these as I'm out in the river because I spend a lot of time out there, and decided I'd start using some of that as well.
Rondo is basically a musical term which is a repetition of themes or tempo, a quickening tempo. And this is a purely non-objective sculpture, which means that it doesn't represent anything out in the real world, but it does have some figurative associations when I look at it, and it reminded me of a striding figure or possibly a dancing figure.
The left side, when you look at it from the street, is a boy holding a rock over his head. On the back side, there's a man etched into the surface throwing a rock over to the other side. And so selective memory, worrying guilt, is basically about how you can waste your time with the boy in worrying about your past, and you can waste your time worrying about the future with the older man, what you're going to become. And the whole time in the middle, if you look at the piece in total, it looks like it's eroded. And so it looks like they've been throwing those rocks at the other side, slowly eroding the present.
All of my work arrives from children and violence and how we raise them in a violent society. So I deal a lot with childhood games and role play, and as well as the perceived masculine image that we try to force kids into. And war fighting is a part of that, as well as I think we accept a certain amount of what I call the myth of patriotism, to say it's all right if it's for a good cause to, play with machines of war, as long as you're on the good guy's side.
It's kind of a take on a sort of a portable landscape, the idea of taking a scene with you wherever you want to go maybe. Obviously it's large scale, so it doesn't really apply, but it also plays a little bit on a shifting scale. It's got some cinder blocks that are propping up sort of an axe head shaped element that has a idealistic cloud in it, so it's kind of a cartoonish sort of approach to it, and the cinder blocks are about 2.5 times the size of a normal cinder block, so it gives you a little bit of a change in scale, so it makes you feel a little smaller.
This is the inverted arch steel. I've done this piece a number of times in different materials. It's also been done in limestone, and it's been an image that I've worked and reworked, and what the series is about is dealing with negative space, not the positive form, but the negative space that surrounds it, which is what defines the work itself.
Stride is a creature. People see a lot of different things in it, but it's a creature that is well armored. It's about kind of moving out on your own and being unusual and unsure and kind of awkward, and but at the same time being protected.
What my piece is about, it's kind of, the title is called Time Warp, and it's kind of this idea about like the celestial events and kind of time travel and suggesting, going into space or taking you to a distant place.
The sculpture was made after looking at some images from children's stories like Jack and Jill, and sort of pastoral images of wooden buckets, and we thought about that phrase, no use crying over spilled milk. And we thought about those phrases in relationship to the current economic situation and things that have been in the current events lately, like people losing their homes, and how we wanted to contrast that kind of humorous or pastoral image of the wooden bucket with images of the instability in neighborhoods and communities now.
The piece started off one way and kind of evolved in the model process, but it's basically kind of a fun piece and just a celebration of my return to the Midwest after being away for so long, for over 20 years.
The piece is intended to be sort of a celebration of America's waterways and the history that has been produced through our waterways, be it commerce, culture, influence, and the two heads are meant to reference this notion that influence of ideas, language, culture is never a one-way proposition.
My sculpture titled Victoria is actually a kind of a variation on a well-known sculpture titled Nike of Samothrace, or Winged Victory. It's a old Greek sculpture that's from the Louvre, and so when you think about Victoria or victory, it can mean many different things. And a lot of times it's something that's heavy. It's something that has a lot of history to it, a lot of weight to it, and it's not always light and free like a winged, angel.
The name is Whispering Stones, and I've been living in Japan for about 35 years now. And where I live is very rural. You've got all these rice fields, and every year they plant these small plants, and they grow in the rice fields. And when the wind blows, they move like waves or something. And I want to make a sculpture like that. So I came up with the idea to make long rods of iron and put on top of those rods heavy stones. And if the diameter is very small and the stones are heavy, and when the wind will blow, they probably move. And actually they move. I like that very much.
My piece is the White Rabbit, and it's all made out of recycled materials. That has become a crux of my work. It's turning the ordinary garbage of everyday society into an enchanted piece of sculpture. The White Rabbit, I think, fits that really well. He's very much in belief of it being a fine day, even though he's kind of racing around and had a lot to do. He still took time to enjoy every moment, and that's, I think, what this is about.
Willow dust is an enlarged piece of pollen, actually. A very small pollen come from the willow tree that I enlarged to make into something that is sculpturally interesting and something that people can interact with. I tend to really enjoy very small things like little seed pods or other aspects of nature that you typically don't see on a daily basis. But then when you have the opportunity to come up close to it, investigate it, then you can see all the beautiful forms and how lovely it actually is.
concept is structural in the sense it deals with structural and geometric relationships, and the sculpture is about the metamorphosis that we all share in the human experience from the time we're born until the time we leave the planet.
The impetus behind it was looking at the landscapes around the world where industrial agriculture has started using irrigation systems to grow in places that it shouldn't be able to grow, and the resulting landforms and land masses that come from that. And then I kind of took that and ran with it. The other idea behind it is the idea that that's not necessarily a sustainable way to do stuff. So the sculpture gets smaller the taller it gets, the longer it goes on.
It's a sculpture made out of an old farm windmill tower and various pieces of junk that you find around old farmsteads, around my shop. I'm kind of surrounded by piles of old things that were once something else, and I combine them and make something new that looks different and I hope interesting.
Look at the Chinese zodiac calendar, you have different animals. You have 12 different animals. So I took those 12 animals and I turned them into Southwest animals since I live in the Southwest. So the pig became a javelina, and the year of the dog became a wolf, and the tiger became a puma. And then I put the totems together with balls of flowers because the flowers represent growth. And when you look at my totem pole, they're sort of ovoid shapes, which is a symbol to me of life. And it's sitting on a frog, which is sitting on a lily pad, which is under the lily pad is fish, which is the water source, which is the source of life.
Such a variety of sculpture. What better way to illustrate the power of public art than to dot a landscape where people go to relax and have fun with an ever-changing display of artwork? That's Art on the River. Thanks for watching.